What's up, people? Shay here, Uneven Bounce. Hope you guys are doing very well today. I am joined for this latest live stream once again by my good friend here, Rajiv Radhakrishnan. Rajiv, how you doing?
Yes, very fine. Fine, thank you, Shay. Hope you're doing well as well.
You're doing well. I am doing well, but I'm going to get probably quite depressed over the next hour or so as we take obviously a very painful trip down memory lane. We're discussing Australia's dominant side of the 90s and noughties, in particular, obviously highlighting and going into detail about their dominance of England in the Ashes series, spanning between 1989 to 2003, which basically encapsulates 8 straight wins on the trot for us England fans. Very painful memories, but unfortunately that's what it was anyway. It's not so bad anymore, is it? So Rajiv, obviously that's a topic you want to discuss for some time. You want to get into it. So as I always say, Rajiv, for these things, the floor is yours, mate. The floor is yours. So if you want to take it away, we'll start obviously with the 89 series, which was a absolute walloping of England, 4-0, I believe, in a 6 Test match series, wasn't it? Ended with the innings loss to end things, wasn't it? In 89. Anyway, Rajiv, I'll hand it to you, mate, if you want to crack on and go into some detail.
And I think it's important this particular period for the likes of us because we grew up during this era. Our formative years coincided with that evolution of the Australian cricket team, our teenage years. And I'll just take a step back from before 1989 when it started to go all horribly wrong. It was the Ashes tour in 86, 87 under Mike Gatting. I was 7 and it's my first ever Ashes memory. And no satellite TV in those days, no internet, no iPhone. So, the news filtered through on the newspaper or on the radio. But I was really too young to appreciate that anyway. But so when England went down there and did very well, 1-2-1, they won at Melbourne, 2-0 up, they lost the last test, the dead rubber under Mike Gatting. Now, if someone said to us at that stage, and I was 7, if someone said to me that the next time you would see an England captain hold the Ashes would be when you were 26, in 2005, nearly 2 decades later, no one would have believed them. It would have been absolute rubbish. But that is exactly what happened. I had to wait 2 decades for that. So 86, 87 happened. Everything was rosy in England. And then by the time 1989 arrived, there had been some turmoil in the preceding 12 months with England. And a fresh start was needed for the 1989 series. And the turmoil I talk about was Mike Gatting in 1988 being stripped of the England captaincy with alleged liaisons with a barmaid in a hotel room and on the back of his argument with Shakil Rana in Pakistan. So all of those sort of gave the bad boy image that England were now sort of having with Chris Broad, smashing his stumps and a lot of attitude issues. And then 1989 came about. Graham Gooch was actually originally appointed England captain for the winter tour to India before that. Because of his South African connections, India said no, and the tour was cancelled. So we're now in the spring of 1989, and there's no official captain for England. And it was down to the G-men. So it was Mike Gatting, would they bring him back? David Gower, would they bring him back? Or Graham Gooch, he just had it for 2 tests, so they're going to bring him back. The selectors chose Mike Gatting. Not many people know this, but it was overruled by the TCCB at the time, as it was known, the precursor to the ECB, because of the issues. And David Gower was handed the England captaincy. And for me, as a 10-year-old boy now, my hero was reinstated, welcomed back to the throne, and everything was brilliant. And it would be Gooch, Broad, Gower, Lamb, Gatting, both of my heroes were going to be there. And Australia, I mean, come on, I didn't even know any of the players who were coming. So I wasn't worried, and I don't think David Gower was worried, and none of the England press were worried. No one was worried. But what we didn't know at the time was that after Alan Border had lost the Ashes for a second time in 86, 87, after losing in 85 to David Gower as well, it was at Melbourne, and they lost by an innings in 3 days, absolutely pummeled by England. And Alan Border, he sat down with the selectors, and they said, we need to sort this out. What are we going to do? I mean, we're just in the hangover of the Packer era. A lot of players had gone, as well as to the South African Rebel tours. So Australia could not have been in a worse place. But they stuck with Border as captain. They said, we're going to stay with Steve Waugh. We're going to invest with Merv Hughes, Dean Jones, David Boone. These are the guys we're going to stick with. Some of them were going to cull now. We got rid of Greg Ritchie. He didn't fit the bill. Some players a bit harsh, but they stuck with that core of 5 players. And when they came in '89, 2.5 years later, it was those 5 still. They've now won the '87 World Cup. They've now found a wicketkeeper. They've brought back Terry Alderman after doing the Rebel tours.
Seamer.
The Seamer, yeah. He played an integral part in '89. And Mark Taylor they had found as well. So they came here, and the series went from bad to worse. It was the most one-sided series you could ever imagine. It would have been 6-0 if it wasn't for the weather. And David Gower, he never had the side he wanted. There was always injuries, deaths, and families. And also England suffered a South African rebel tour, so a lot of players left there. Mike Gadding took the tour. Chris Broad, John Embury, Tim Robinson, a lot of guys left, and it left a hole in English cricket, which had to be filled by a lot of youth. You know, they brought in Mike Atherton at the age of 21 to make his debut. Angus Fraser came in, Devon Malcolm came in. A lot of people made their debut in that series, and they probably wouldn't have if a lot of those injuries and the South African Rebel Tour. So anyway, it was 4-0. Mark Taylor scored 839 runs. It's probably number 4 or 5 of the most runs in one series.
Over 6 tests, wasn't it? 6 tests.
Over 6 tests, yeah. He played, I think, 9 innings in those 6 tests. And I think that probably the most tragic moment probably wasn't losing the Ashes at Old Trafford. It was probably at Trent Bridge when Australia batted the whole day and scored 300 without losing a single wicket. Marsh and Taylor put on 301, and England were just inept. It was probably the worst day of cricket I've ever seen. I still remember I was 10 years old and watching it at home. And I still remember David Boone had his pads on the whole day, batting at number 3, but he didn't have to use them until the next morning. And both of them got injured during the match, and David Gower had to open the innings, and he shouldered arms on the 5th ball of the day or something of the innings, and was clean bowled. And you just saw his face. It was just almost like a weak surrender. It was like the final nail in the coffin, and you could see he was mentally shattered.
The first of many, wasn't it? The first of how it always seems to be with Ashes series victories, or for Australia anyway. But England, at the end, just want to go on, well, especially in Australia, just want to get on the next plane home. That's all we're thinking about.
Yep. The gulf between the sides, it was the most one-sided Ashes series out of all the ones that we're going to talk about. And it was a disaster. And then at the end of it, David Gower was promptly sacked as England captain. They went back to Graham Gooch, who was 4 years older. And England did have some success now before the next Ashes series. And that Ashes series now, 1990-91, there was no Botham still. He was out injured. He wasn't out injured. He was dropped after injury. Mike Gadding wasn't there because he was still serving his ban in South Africa. And it was sort of the old guard was only Gooch, Lamb and Gower. And they went to Australia, and they'd had a very positive recent 12 months. And so going there on that series, there was a lot of hope. But there were things going on behind the scenes that didn't assist, and that was the falling out between Gooch and Gower, the 2 senior pros. Now, if you have a falling out between 2 junior players, you can sort of get by that. It's not as important. But when the 2 senior men are not getting on, it doesn't assist in helping team spirit build when the youngsters, the Athertons, the Stewarts are looking up to the 2 probably heroes as they were growing up, who are not getting on. And what I found interesting is that I read about that tour is, even though I'm a huge David Gower fan, everyone knows that. I think David Gower, Gooch said, when David Gower was captain, Gooch did exactly what David Gower asked him to do, and that's the kind of guy Gooch is. But the roles were reversed. Graham Gooch said, now I'm captain. He is not following my instructions. He's not following my orders. He's not setting the example to the youngsters. And I have to admit, Graham Gooch is probably right on that. It doesn't help that David Gower flies an aeroplane across the cricket ground during the state game with another junior player. It was hilarious, and he's dined out on that story forever, for ages. And I think even though David Gower was scoring runs on the pitch, his first 3 tests, he got a 50 at Brisbane, He played an absolute jet of an innings at Melbourne. I still remember that 100, and I'll come back to that. And he got 100 at Sydney. Then he does the stupid thing of flying on an aeroplane, and then his form for the last 2 Test matches just dipped away. He still came second in the averages, as he always does, but those last 2 Test matches, he fell away there. And England, on that series, Gooch got injured in the first Test. Alan Lamb captained the first Test, and it was 3-0, but it wasn't as bad as the 4-0 in the 6 Test match series in '89. The 3-0 is not reflective completely of how England performed. There were some very good performances. And there was one match where Graham Gooch kept on Devon Malcolm and bowled out Rackham, and they could have chased down the runs, but Gooch kept the spinners on. I think it was Adelaide, but I can't exactly recall that match. But it was 3-0, disaster. And there was one interesting story of that, though, is that Steve Waugh, who was playing in that series, who had a fantastic 1989 series. So I forgot to mention Steve Waugh came of age in the '89 series. But he was struggling now in this series, and he had been for a few months. And he came home to his family home, and his parents were there, and his brother was there, Mark Waugh. And Steve said to him, "Congratulations, you're in the side." And the family were really happy. And then they said, "Well, actually, whose place are you taking in the side?" He said, "You're taking mine." And apparently, their mother cried because happy for one son to be playing for Australia, but obviously Mark went there. And Mark went on to score a century on debut at Adelaide. One of the most delightful entrances into Test cricket, I heard one reporter say, and it was one of his most elegant innings of all his 20 Test centuries. And he timed the ball, he used his wrist, and apparently when he came off the field, he told Alan Border, "You should have picked me about 2 or 3 years before." But anyway, there was a 5-year gap between the twins playing Test cricket together. And then they would go on to play together for another 100 Test matches. So it wasn't all doom and gloom for their mother, so she need not have cried. But England came back from that 91 issue. Gooch was furious with his players. He was especially angry with his senior professional. And David Gower would only go on to play 3 more Test matches for England. And that ended his career, which I think cost England a lot if they'd solved their differences. But I think we have to share the blame between both Gooch and Gower.
Did Mark Rambakash make his debut in that series? Or was that in the West Indies in the summer of '91?
Yeah.
Was it? Well, I thought so, yeah. He was 23.
Yeah. But now Ashes 1993 comes along. And England have had a disastrous last winter. They went to India.
Yeah.
They even lost to Sri Lanka on the end of that tour. First time they ever lost to Sri Lanka. And they lost to the Oval Test against Pakistan at the end of the last series. So that means 5 series losses in a row.
Was that the series that were Alex Stewart scored 190 in '92 against Pakistan? It's top score, wasn't it? That was Wasim and Waqar at absolute pomp.
Yep,
that series I remember that was I remember I was just getting to cricket at that time. I was like 9-10 years old. But I remember Wasim and Waqar, they were absolutely lethal. I mean, I'm not gonna necessarily question the state of the ball at times, let's be honest. But the reverse swing those guys were getting, especially Waqar, was frightening. Absolutely frightening.
It was brilliant. And England 2-1 to that in that series wasn't a disaster. They were playing very good cricket. Then the winter happened. Gooch didn't take Gower to India. That was causing a huge thing. And in '93, they were asking for Gower to return. He never did. For whatever reason. Well, we know the reason. And then 1993, Australia come. Now, the batting order, they've had 2 changes. Jeff Marsh is no longer there. It's Michael Slater is going to be opening with Taylor. Dean Jones is not there, and Mark Waugh is at number 4. So that's a change from 1989. And I think that just is indicative of Australia that from 89 to 93, there's just 2 changes in the batting order, and one because of form, and one Dean Jones probably because of attitude. Now, I was a huge Dean Jones fan, and I was looking forward to seeing him in '93. He had a great '89 Ashes series, but for whatever reason, the Australian Cricket Board and him fell out, and he didn't come. Not that they missed him, which is, it's a lot easier to drop a player of his class when you've got some substitutes who are, more than capable. So anyway, they came over. They humiliated England in the ODI series 3-0. First Test, Old Trafford, and we see. And I remember there was a Cricketer magazine issue up in April, May, and it had this guy Shane Warne on the front. I had no idea who it was, and it said that the caption was Australia's trump card. I mean, I would have used, because Shane Warne's from Melbourne, I would have used maybe Victoria's Secret or something like that. But anyway, so the first ball, and I was at home. I had the day off from school. I'm not sure why. I was only 14, and I saw this guy Shane Warne come on to bowl, and he bowled that infamous delivery to Mike Gadding, which will be played till the end of time. The most famous delivery in Test cricket history. Pitched outside leg and hit the top of off. I think Mike Gadding still has nightmares about it, and I find it funny that Graham Gooch said that Mike Gadding wouldn't have missed it if it was a cheese roll. Australia come, and then we see Shane Warne, we see Michael Slater. They win the first test, not that convincingly. England did okay, but then Lords was an absolute disaster. The top three batsmen got hundreds, and if Mark Waugh had scored one more run, he had got 99. A member of the MCC would have won 100 grand because he put a bet that the top four batsmen would get 100 at 100 to 1. And he showed the betting slip to Mark Waugh saying, your one run has cost me this amount. Mark Waugh didn't get it. But I was actually there on the Sunday of that test match and I saw another 99. I saw Mike Atherton fall over on 99 and get cruelly run out. I was right there at sort of between square leg and mid wicket in the crowd. So England lost that Lord's test, and now it's 7 in a row. Things were saying, we've got to get new personnel in. There were still calls for David Gower, but Graham Gooch said no. They brought in Graham Thorpe, great decision, and Trent Bridge. They actually drew the test match, and they nearly won it. And Graham Thorpe, on debut in the second innings, got 100 and launched, a very, very successful career. One of my heroes. So
the Australians always rated Graham Thorpe extremely high. I know, they rated him very highly. I think prior to 2002 to the 2005 Ashes, I think obviously when Kevin Peterson over Thorpe, which obviously was turned out very well. But I think, to be fair, there was a lot of confidence going into that series from the Australians. But they actually dropped Thorpe, which was for good, wasn't it? That was Thorpe's. Was it? Yeah, did he have? No. Did he play 99 test? Was it? That was the whole.
No, he played 100. Did
he play exactly 100? Was it? Okay, yeah, I remember. I remember that obviously. Michael Vaughan just obviously loved Peterson. He plumped him, didn't he? So, which obviously worked out in the end. But yeah, maybe there was too much scar tissue around Graham Thorpe. To be fair,
probably. I think Michael Vaughan wanted a clean bill of health for the 05. No mental scarring from previous series, which Graham Thorpe certainly had suffered. And because England had a winning draw, if you like to call it that, there's a lot of hope for Headingley. Unfortunately, it just went completely wrong. Steve Waugh got a massive 100. Alan Border got a double, and England lost by a huge margin in innings. And within minutes of their loss, Graham Gooch resigned as England captain, and Alan Border had now slayed another England captain, Gower in 89, and now Gooch in 93. And now England now looking again for another captain. The candidates were Mike Gadding, whether they're going to go back to him, Alex Stewart, or Mike Atherton. And they went for Atherton. Stewart's role as a wicketkeeper probably caused him to lose the chance there. And Gadding, they were trying to think, like, we're going to look forward now.
And also Stewart was obviously opening the batting at times, wasn't he? He opened the batting, he was going at 6. There's a lot of on the shoulders.
Confusion on what role Alex Stewart was going to play. So
just before, sorry, Rajiv, to cut you off here, just before we move away from the 93 Ashes, we've got a question from Sign here. I think it just jumps off the chat, but I'll pose this question to you, Rajiv.
Because the rough patch was quite large compared to others now, well, the pitch was probably only day 2, or even it was day 2. So I don't think there would have been that much rough around that edge. And I still think that is proving a bit harsh on Shane Warne. Still, he can turn it on ice. So it was a fairly new wicket. I don't think there would have been too much rough anyway. So yeah, if it was, you're looking at day 5 in India on a kart track in Calcutta, then yeah, but not in England. You're not going to get that. So, and it was June, and it wasn't that warm. It was a good, cool day, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I don't think we can. So I think Shane Warne deserves that one. So yeah. So and then they went for Atherton as England captain, and yeah, fresh face, 25, wasn't even a county captain, probably wasn't even a fixture in the side. He had played all the preceding days. He was scoring runs. He was getting a lot of 50s. So I probably wouldn't have gone for him. I would have gone for someone who was sort of more of a permanent fixture. For me, I've always think that the captain should be worth his place inside. However, Atherton went on to have the most fruitful time after captaincy. He had like a great 3 or 4 years and scored heavily. So, it did work for him. They won the last test at the Oval. Great. That was quite positive. I mean, admittedly, they were 4-0 down at that stage, but that gave a little bit of enjoyment. The last time England had beaten Australia would have been in that 86, 87. The other 2 preceding Ashes were England didn't win a single test. So it was good, even though it was a dead rubber. And then England, that winter, decided to go with a new plan. The Gower was still not recalled, and they went for these youth policies, which I still find quite strange because John Embury, Mike Gadding, and Graham Gooch still came back afterwards. And David Gower be thinking, well, hang on a minute, what is this youth policy? And I hope, David, you are watching. David Gower, my hero. You have written me a letter, and it's not a restraining order, but yes, I think he knows my love for you. So I hope you're watching, David. So there we go. I get to the 1994-95 Ashes in Australia, obviously. And England have had a good series against South Africa in the preceding summer. Devon Malcolm blew South Africa away by 9 wickets. We're taking 9 wickets. We did that in another podcast.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
And there was a lot of interest, enthusiasm to go. And Ray Lingworth was now the supreme
Chairman of Selectors.
Chairman of Selectors. He was everything, I think. He was everything after that series.
He had it in for Devon Malcolm.
No, he definitely did not get on with Devon Malcolm.
He did.
So they went on that tour. They made a huge mistake by not taking Angus Fraser. I think that was a huge miss. Luckily, Angus Fraser was playing club cricket in Sydney. He got a thing, and it was very useful that he was out there, as it turned out later on in the series. Anyway, they went there. Poor Devon Malcolm actually contracted chickenpox, so couldn't play in the first test. But as with all,
we saw the birth of Darren Gough, didn't we, in this series?
We saw the birth of Darren Gough. He had made his debut in 1994 during the summer. But as with all Ashes series during that 8 series dominance by Australia, the first moments were always crucial. So in '89, it was David Gower winning the toss and putting Australia in, which was a disaster. 1991 was Graham Gooch getting injured. 93, you got the Shane Warne ball. 94-95, the very first delivery to Freitas, wild long hop. Michael Slater smashes it to the boundary, and the tone had been set. However, some would say the tone had already been set by the fact that Gooch and Gadding were in the Ashes score. And Mike Atherton afterwards said, having those two, the elder statesman, caused him a lot of difficulty in the field because he had to put them at slip, but they weren't that agile in the slip area in terms of reflexes, but he couldn't put them out in the field because they were too slow. So people like Ramprakash and Hussain were not playing, and they would have added so much athleticism to the field. Gooch and Gadding couldn't do that, understandably, at that age. They were there to score runs, but neither of them did. And by the end of the series, they had both retired. But the interesting thing about that tour is, I think, the arrogance almost by Australia, thinking that England aren't going to provide them with much of a challenge. And if you remember that World Series tournament they used to have, the other team was also Zimbabwe. So what did Australia do? They said Australia A are going to play in the quadrangular tournament now, the World Series in effect, alongside with the Ashes. And I still remember thinking, I was getting quite concerned because, as you know, I'm quite a stats anorak. And I wanted to know that if the Australia A games would be classified as proper ODIs. And I was having, sleepless nights thinking, no, they can't do this. And my school friend, a guy called Jeff Richards, was in my year when we were at Merchant Taylors. And his dad happened to be, at the time, the chief executive of the ICC, Dave Richards. So my school friend, Jeff, actually went home and asked his dad, my school friend, Rajiv, is very worried. Can you assist? And his dad said, don't worry, it's not going to be counted. And the next day in the newspapers, the ICC actually said matches involving Australia A would be included. But I found out before the rest of the world. But there you go. Anyway, so...
good to know people in the right places, Rajiv.
Sorry?
Good to know people in the right places.
Of course. But I don't like
information, yeah.
I never name drop. It's not my thing to do that. I never show off things like that. Anyway, so England won the first 2 tests handsomely. But at Sydney, England actually had a really good fist of it. Darren Gough, as he said, came to life here. He got a 50.
And 6 of 49. 51 not out, I think. 6 of 49, yeah.
Yeah, in the fourth innings. And he got that 50 in, it would have been England's third innings. And Devon Malcolm came in and hit a 29 in no time at all. I remember this huge 60 hit, probably went outside this SCG, if that's possible. And there was a lot of interest, and it was 2-0. This test was drawn. And with that, they went into the fourth test, and they only had 5 specialist batsmen available because that series, the amount of injuries England suffered was incredible.
I remember that. I remember this.
The irony is, only Gooch and Gadding, the 2 oldest players, they're the ones who didn't have any injury issues. So Darren Gough got injured after that Sydney test. They had to fly in. Mark Ramprakash, who was playing for England A, I think it was in India, I might have got that wrong. And they only had 5. And I was just thinking about it. They had 5 specialist batsmen available in that whole tour party, ready to go on the field. And they had to put, I think Steve Rhodes had to bat at 6. And I was just thinking, you can go to the commentary box. There's a left-handed guy there who is better than all of you put together. Just go to the commentary box. He'll be more than happy to come out and score a double 100 against Australia, but they didn't. Anyway, so we won't delve into that too much. But he was commentating, and he could easily have filled in the shoes of 3 batsmen. Anyway, so they won at Adelaide. Mike Gannon got 100 after 7 years. Obviously, 3 of those years were banned.
This wasn't the series, was it, where Graham Hick was 98 not out, and Allenton,
that was a Sydney test.
It was, yeah. And then obviously Allenton, he declared. Hick was fuming that day. I remember that. Hick was absolutely fuming.
And I think that actually...
But to be fair, Allenton regretted that decision. He came out publicly and said that. He said that he should really, because the dressing room would have been in the high, the team would have been in the high, they would have gone out, slightly more aggressive in the field, it came to bowling. But it was a very poor decision that from Allenton.
It did. It took the sport out, and Hick never went on to get an Ashes century. That's the closest he ever got. And there was a sort of a deflationary feel. And
I don't think you'll ever find that happen now. I really don't think you ever find in Monday cricket in a test match at 98 not out, you declare on, especially in a game of such magnitude in an Ashes series.
Of course, and what it could have started for Hick if he had got that and the confidence.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. That really wasn't. That's up there with obviously Mark Ramprakash, one of the great failures in English cricket as far as I'm concerned. Graham Hick and Mark Ramprakash to not replicate anywhere near the form they produced in first-class cricket is a damning indictment, really, on how they were handled, in my opinion, by the ECB.
Yeah,
at the time.
In fact, if you look at those 8 Ashes series, Mark Ramprakash, during that period of dominance, he played 12 of those test matches. There were 43 in total. I'll do the stats at the end of when I get to the 2002-2003 series, the last one, and he averaged 42. And Graham Thorpe and him are the only two best averages of the players who have played a significant amount of matches. So for Ramprakash, yes, he struggled against other teams, but his performances against the best team of his era is 42, which is worth double considering the attack he was having to face. So I think Mark would be very, very proud of that. And Graham Thorpe's the only one who averaged more in that era and having played a minimum number of test matches. So they won that, but then Perth was a complete disaster. I remember England were at one point 26-5 or something. They lost that, and then at the end of that series, the usual thing came. They lost the Perth one very badly. Gatting and Gooch retired at the end of that from Test cricket. They kept playing first class. And I remember Atherton saying, and it was sort of like, it was getting boring now. It was every time at the end of every series, we'll say, we're going to change county cricket, infusion of youth. So Atherton, he kept doing that. And, he's probably having a backhand of the fact that he had to take Gooch and Gatting. He said that, and guess what? 6 months later, John Emery is playing against the West Indies. So it was all these kind of comments that you sort of get at the end of a series, and it's just like the same boring old thing, and England could still go back to what they always had done. In that era, things have changed now. So anyway, 3-1 in the winter. Some say it could easily have been 2-2, or 3-2, in fact, if they'd won that Sydney test. The weather intervened a bit. So not a complete disaster. 3-1, I don't think actually reflects the actual gulf between for that particular series. Anyway, 1997 now, so 2.5 years. Atherton is still in charge now. So Atherton's been tackling for a long time. And I think this is, out of all the 8 series, this is the closest, the best chance England had of winning. And they won that first test at Edgbaston. Mark Butcher made his debut. Didn't do much, but Hussain, remember, he got that magnificent double 100 with Thorpe. They put on 280 odd or something. Thorpe got about a 140, Hussein 207, and a fantastic first innings. Mark Taylor was in dreadful form, and they were going to actually drop him if he failed in that first test, and Steve Waugh would have taken over floors. But he managed to get 100 at Edgbaston. And in fact, Mark Taylor started every Ashes series in England with a century. He did it in '89, did it in '93, and again in '97 in the second innings, '97. I remember that day when they bowled Australia out in the first. I was doing my A levels '97, and they had them at 54 for 8, and Shane Warne came in and got some runs.
Was it 130 all out or something that day? 130.
Yeah, it was 130 all out, and
yeah,
Shane Warne came in and got about 40 odd at the end, and then Hussein and Thorpe piled on the runs. They got a lead, and then Mark Taylor had a rescue, got his 100, rescued his career, extended his career. That would have been his last test, and then England won by 9 wickets, and there was a lot of hope here. Lords came, McGrath got 8 wickets, rain affected match.
8 for 38.
8 for 38. I remember that ball, he bowled out Alex Stewart. Alex Stewart misjudging the slope of Lords.
Oh, yeah. He shouldered arms, I remember that.
Yeah, it's one of the most classic deliveries. And
he was just absolute. I mean, nemesis is not even the word. I mean, he just loves absolutely terrorising English batsmen. I mean, the word bunny's used a lot, but Mike Atherton really was that guy's bunny. He just had his number 19 times.
19 times, so ridiculous. Yeah. Because of that, I don't think Atherton really had to face much of Shane Warne. Then Australia went on to win the next 3 Test matches. Graham Thorpe dropped Matthew Elliott on 40. Australia were 50 for 4, and he dropped Matthew Elliott. Was it Mark Elliott? Matthew Elliott.
Matthew Elliott, opening batsman for Morgan.
Yeah. And Matthew Elliott went on to get 199. And apparently in the dressing room, Atherton said to Thorpe, thinking that he was lining the load, saying, "Thorpe, you've just dropped the Ashes." And apparently that didn't go down too well. And, but Thorpe, it was a regulation catch. And Thorpe, that chance, if they had taken that chance, Australia would have been 50 for 5. And things could have been a lot different. And then come Old Trafford, Steve Waugh played, he got 200 in the match. And I remember Steve Waugh, looking at the stats, he was 32 in 1997. That was his 1200. He got his 11th and 1200 at Old Trafford. And he was the only one who could combat the conditions. And it was just testament to what a player this guy had become, Steve Waugh. He just fought it out, even when it was really tough. He was there, and he got those 2 wonderful hundreds. And at the age of 32, he had now got 12 centuries. In the next 6.5 years before he retired in 2004, he would go on to get 20 more centuries, which just shows how much he improved with age. He just pretty much like Graham Gooch, he just kept developing Steve Waugh. The only thing he didn't develop was his bowling. His bowling did go downhill, but his batting and the way that he built his innings, and I think those 2 innings at Old Trafford was just indicative of what he brought to the Australian side. It was fantastic and great to watch in awful conditions. No one else on either side could handle it, and Steve Waugh managed to get 200. Fantastic.
This is the Test match where Warne took 6 of 48.
At Old Trafford, I'm not sure. I cannot recall off the top of my head.
I think that's where he got 6 of 48. Yeah.
Yeah. So Australia won, and then come to the Oval Test matches, 3-1, and England spirited fight back, and they won. Australia again chasing a small target, and
I think it's 132 or something, or 130 in the 4th innings. Yep. Phil Tufnell took a bunch.
He took 7. Kasparov took 7, and there was another bowler who took 7 wickets. There were 3 people who took 7 wickets in an innings. It was Kasparov, Tufnell, and I'm going to say Glenn McGrath, but I'm not sure if that's correct. But yeah, so anyway, they're 3-2. And 3-2 is very respectable considering that Australian dominance. I'll be fair. I think we're fair to say the Australians didn't really get into that series. They were carried by Steve Waugh. Mark Taylor, he got that 100, but he was still struggling for form. Mark Waugh didn't have a great series. So a lot was on the shoulders. And it wasn't a batting easy series, whether intervened, especially at Lords. And And Mike Atherton wanted to resign as England captain after that. He was persuaded not to. He went to the West Indies and he regretted that as captain. He didn't have a great series with that either.
They lost 3-1, didn't they, that series? England.
Yes, they did. They did. One of the test matches had to be abandoned, so it became a 6 test match series with that.
Laura's 375 was 1994, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was Laura's. No,
but it's 400.
No, that was later. That was
2004. Yeah, I'd say the memory.
10 years later.
Yeah.
So, England, 1998, Alex Stewart becomes England captain. He'd deputised for Atherton before, for Gooch actually. Sorry. So he captained twice before, and as soon as Stewart became captain, there's something about Alex Stewart. He likes to look in charge. There's something he laps it up. Atherton's a little bit more quiet, reserved. Alex Stewart's out there. He loves all the attention. He likes the speeches in the dressing room and all this. And then good luck to him. He loves it. Let him like it. And in '98, they had a good series that they won. England won their first 5-match series over 12 years, for nearly 12 years against South Africa.
2-1. Yeah, I was there at Headingley in that test.
Oh, you were there?
I went to Headingley there for that test. I remember.
Yeah, that was a fantastic series.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of enthusiasm going into that Ashes series. A bit of gloss was taken off because they lost that to Murali's match against Sri Lanka.
Yeah, the one-off test match, 16 wickets and all that, yeah.
So they went to Australia and, referring to my notes, and Alex Stewart, according to his autobiography, he said on the visa form when landing in Australia, they asked purpose of visit. Apparently Alex Stewart wrote to win the Ashes. So they landed there. And one thing... the highlight for me is that, again, that Brisbane test, the amount of catches England dropped, the amount of chances throughout that series. Darren Gough, I don't know how many chances he had dropped off his bowling. It must have been so frustrating for him. And they lost the second and third test. It comes to the fourth test at Melbourne. And I remember it was a freezing day, absolutely freezing, cold, miserable day. And I was watching it on Sky in the warmth of my home in the Christmas in the Northern Hemisphere in England, and they lost 2 wickets in the first over. Atherton went, and I think it was Butcher. Atherton had a dreadful series. I think he averaged 13. But Stewart, who didn't keep wicket in this test, got 100. And in the end, Australia needed only about 170 to win, and they were going in the last innings. They were going well. If you remember, Mark Ramprakash took that incredible catch. At mid-wicket, I think it was, to get rid of Justin Langer. A fantastic catch, and that propelled England with Dean Headley ripping through Australia and taking 6 wickets, and Steve Waugh being stranded at the end, and Darren Gough having a laugh at him, saying, "Oh, you wanted another not out to help your average." And they won that test match, and they went on to Sydney, and Michael Slater got a reprieve for a run-out. There was a glitch in the TV umpire thing, and he would have been run out if they had the full view. And England lost that test match roughly by the same amount of runs Michael Slater ended up scoring. So it could easily have been 2-all. But yeah, at the end of the day, it was 3-1, and that's what it is. Umpiring decisions, as we know, are all part of the parcel of game. So that was the end of that series. And again, this is now, we're getting used to this. This is the 1990s. This is England haven't won a single Ashes series throughout the whole of the 1990s.
Yeah, whole decade, yeah.
Whole decade, yeah. So 2001 comes along. I'm now 22, and I thought, you know what? England have now won 4 series in a row. They beat the West Indies the previous summer. They beat Zimbabwe. Okay, it is Zimbabwe, but they went to Asia and they beat Pakistan in the dark, and they beat Sri Lanka, coming back from 2-1 down, 1-0 down to win 2-1.
Incredible victories they were. Yeah,
indeed.
Hussein and Fletcher.
Hussein and Fletcher, yeah, re-engineering the England attitude and outlook. And the England team looked. There's Trescothick and Vaughan with the new guys. You had Thorpe at his peak now.
Yeah, Flintoff there as well.
Flintoff, yeah, same. And the 2001 Ashes series, I was looking very much forward to it. It was going to be a 5-match series, and now Steve Waugh had finally got the coveted position as Australian captain. He had to wait a long time. He had to wait 13 years after making his debut to become captain, and he changed the captaincy style to be much more cutthroat, much more winning at all test matches, even the dead rubbers. So probably raising the bar from Mark Taylor.
Yeah.
And now Adam Gilchrist was now in the side. Ian Healy had been replaced, understandably. And there was a lot more energy and vibrancy and a sort of quest to score runs at almost 4 and over. And Mark Taylor,
Matty Hayden was a Hayden Langer.
Yeah. Hayden Langer had now been recalled in their early 30s, matured as batsmen, tons of time in Sheffield Shield and county cricket. And they too had now evolved into this. They'd just raised the bar since Mark Taylor. That's nothing to take away from Mark Taylor. He developed the side from Alan Border, but now Steve Waugh had taken it even to another level, which we didn't think was possible. And the key ingredients was Gilchrist, and the rebirth of these 3 batsmen, Hayden, Martin, Langer, who had come back with a vengeance. And that 2001 series, there was still hope because England had been doing well. Alex Stewart was still there, even though their records against Australia weren't that great. But again, a disaster. Injuries came again. Graham Thorpe was injured. Vaughan was injured. Hussain was injured. And Atherton had to take over the captaincy again. Alex Stewart even captained against Pakistan before because in that same summer because Hussain was injured. And it was all very one-sided. And I remember I was there at Lords for the Test match. I saw Mark Waugh got 100, and I was there in 1989 when Steve Waugh got 100. So I can say that I saw both Waugh brothers score centuries. I just reference to my note. And then Headingley was now the Ashes had been lost, but it was still it's still an Ashes contest. And we remember Mark Butcher chasing down that final score. Gilchrist did declare early he was deputising for Steve Waugh, who had injured himself during the Trent Bridge Test when the Ashes were won. And Mark Butcher got a splendid 170.
Yeah, and then 320 to win, wasn't it? 320, 317 to win.
And in those days, 320 to win 20 years ago was a lot in the last innings, and Butcher marshalled that innings. And then come to the 5th test, Steve Waugh wasn't actually fit to play. He forced himself in, and he scored 150 on one leg effectively, which again just shows me what kind of player he was. And I think he's such an important person for Australian cricket. 4-1 to Australia. And then, can I just put my light on, if that's okay? I'm just going to switch.
Yeah, no problem. It's quite,
Sorry. Sorry about that. I'm just was a bit pricey there. Another loss there. Hussain, obviously disappointed, and then 18 months later, now they go to Australia, 2002, 2003, and Hussain is captain. And of course, as I've said, with all these 8 Ashes series, always something happens in the first day or so. And here, again, Hussain wins the toss and he chooses the field first. Why did he do that? It was the most shocking decision ever. And Matthew Hayden had a field day. He scored 197. Simon Jones injured himself on the opening day, and the Ashes just went downhill from there. Yeah. And even when England did win at the SCG, it was overshadowed because of Steve Waugh's last ball 100, and the crowd went. It was one of those fantastic days. Again, Steve Waugh at the centre, and you can probably tell from what I've said here. Steve Waugh is a hero of mine. However, I will criticise him. I still think that he probably wanted a little bit too much attention on himself, a little bit like Alex Stewart, where they sort of announced their retirements, before the series has ended, and therefore they love that kind of attention on them as they depart the game. So Steve Waugh retired a year later. So I think those two players do remind me of each other when they want that kind of sort of farewell. The quieter ones, Atherton wouldn't have done that, Trescott wouldn't have done it, but these guys wanted to announce their retirement. But anyway,
they were both very steely characters, both Alex Stewart and Steve Waugh. Steve Waugh obviously came up with that whole concept of mental disintegration, and he loved trolling that out, even though the reality is those boys disintegrated numerous times in the last 10 years since that period, the later teams. But I think he had a lot of ego, Steve Waugh, about him. He was a very gutsy cricketer. I wouldn't say, to be honest with you, the most talented. It actually reminds me of someone like Graham Smith of South Africa. Not the most innately talented player, but through sheer guts, determination, carved an absolutely wonderful career for himself. I think that's fair to say. I think, again, a lot of inner confidence and a lot of ego through, and really as well to boot. But respect, obviously, a world-class player, top player.
Top player, yeah, indeed. And one other highlight for England during that series was Michael Vaughan. He scored three huge hundreds.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
but again, 4-1 again. So
I'd like to touch upon that if you don't mind, because obviously the next series, obviously Vaughan led England to the first Ashes victory in 16 years at the time. And I think obviously you mentioned Michael Vaughan also scored 300, so that's absolutely fantastic. And I remember people were telling him at the time, people were talking about the fact that it's Glenn McGrath, it's Shane Warne, and everyone's like, his approach is very different. There's a lot less scar tissue compared to the likes of the players we mentioned before, Allison, etc., who are gone by now, like Stewart, etc. Michael Vaughan was like, they're just guys with 2 arms, 2 legs, and 1 head. His approach, I remember him in an interview with this, was like, well, I don't care about his name. I'm not playing reputation, I'm playing the bowler. If there's been hit, I'm going to hit it. And I think he was very aggressive. I can't remember what that was. 145. That was in Brisbane. I can't remember which venue in that series. But it was an aggressive counter-attacking knock. But he didn't treat these players with disdain. But he very much was someone you could tell was not shackled by what's happened the previous 15 years. He wasn't. It was a new generation. I don't think that was any coincidence that he was the guy to lead England to that series victory. 2.5 years later. So I just want to point that out.
Yeah, sure. No. He did. I mean, I think I probably will disagree with you a little bit, Shay, in the sense that Michael Vaughan had a great series. I'm not taking anything away from that 02-03 Ashes and that preceding summer in 02 when he got 3 big hundreds against India. But for me, he had 6 months of good Test cricket. The series against India, a bit of Sri Lanka, and then Australia. That's all he did. If you look at what he did before and after, he was averaging probably in the low 30s. I know you're probably talking more of his leadership skills in the 05 Ashes. And yeah, he had
a lot of injuries too. He had a lot of injuries, obviously.
Yeah, he did have a lot of injuries. Yeah, I don't want to take too much away.
I'm not saying it was a brilliant batsman. What I'm just trying to say is I think there's a follow-on, very much so. There's a consistency in his mindset, I believe, from the 02-03 Ashes, how he approached that Ashes. No one's dominated Australia in the away series like that until 2010-11, the likes of Cook and Charlton Trott. But no one's really done that, obviously, since a long time before that. I can't even remember the last time Australian English batsmen dominated Australia like Vaughan did in 02-03. Wait. Because so then you go back 15 years, you know what I mean? And I feel like that mentality, I felt, is one of the reasons why he was able to lead the side to victory against the behemoth of Australia. Because I think a little bit of complacency on Australia's part. They're rolling up again, and okay, we'll sing it again. We're just going to turn up and win. But obviously, a lot of factors played a part. Let's be honest, with the McGrath slipping before the 3rd Test and everything, all on that ball and pulling out at the last moment. Things like that. It all kind of played its part in in how that series transpired a little bit. I think the gods simply were with England. England played wonderful cricket and fearless cricket at times. Andrew Flintoff, absolutely incredible, but the way Vaughan marshalled that team, I think it's because his mentality towards playing Australia. He wasn't going to be overawed. Like Mike Atherton, when he hung up his boots in 2001, that guy was shot to bits. His back was absolutely fucked. Simple, he was taking cortisone injections every day before play. He was gone. His body was broken, but his mind was broken as well. His mind, because Australia, if you think about it, getting pummeled by them for 12 years on the bounce. Mm-hmm. You're just coming through the motions almost. I said before to you, the amount of times you would see an overseas England tour into Australia and the final Test, you just wilt. They have even, that's to be honest with you, that's continued. You think about 06, 07, 02, 03, even 17, 18, 13, 14, we've been battered in these series. And because we're not the race in the first 2 or 3 tests, generally speaking. And at the end, we're just done. But I think, like I said, I really firmly believe that Vaughan was the reason why England won that series, because he was like a guy, I don't care who these people are, we can beat them. Yep. We're not going to be overawed, So, one more point, I don't want to carry on, but I just want to get a little piece out here. Like, I remember in the preceding ODI matches of the 2005 series, there was an altercation between Matthew Hayden and Paul Collingwood. Oh, no, actually, it was an altercation between, I think it was Simon Jones, who chucked the ball back and hit Matty Hayden. Now, Matty Hayden's like a bouncer. He's huge. And I remember Paul Collingwood got right in the face of Hayden. He's like, don't try and fuck with us basically here. We don't care who you are. We don't care what's happened in the past. We are here to win this series. As simple as that. And I always remember that because Simon Jones apologised. I remember chucking the ball back and hitting Hayden. But as soon as Hayden gave back chat, Collingwood was on it straight away to like front up support. Simon Jones said, like, don't think you could have come here and just think you're going to steamroll us. This is a different side, a different leadership, a different era, a different aura of the team. Which that was a pivotal moment. I firmly believe that was a pivotal moment in England when that 2005 Ashes. That moment between Collingwood and Hayden at ODI that happened before. Mm-hmm. That Hayden knew they were in for a fight that series, and it wasn't me a case of just pitching up and just steamrolling us as they always did.
Mm-hmm. No, it was a change in attitude, and which helped. Yeah, and it's. Michael Vaughan, as you say, they changed that kind of approach to their attitude and approach towards Australia. So definitely, and it did help. But yeah, no. So that sort of that 0203. So that was 8 series in a row. I've just got some interesting stats here, actually, which sort of puts it into context the dominance. I actually did some research on it, and it's incredible. When I didn't realise the extent to it. I'd forgotten some of the stuff and. So 8 series, out of that adds up to 43 test matches. And you wouldn't believe it, Australia won 28 of them, 28 out of 43 across those 8 series.
70%.
Yeah, 8 were drawn. And the 7 that England did win, only one of them was when the Ashes was alive. That was the first test of the 1997 series. Only 2 were when the series was alive. And that was on the tours 94 and 98. And the rest were all dead rubbers. So only 1, or maybe if you say 3 with the series, so let's just say 3 were counted. And some other things that for each, during that 8 series period, that Australia employed 45 players, 45 across 8, and England 74 to try and combat.
But that was indicative very much of England selection in the 90s. You know this, Rajiv. You'd have a guy who would be bricking himself because they knew they were basically 4 innings maximum, a batsman in particular. You were 4 bad innings with being dropped.
Yep.
And that's what, if anything, in the most recent past, it's become harder to get out of the side than to get in the side, as if that was the last 10 years. But it was complete opposite during the 90s in particular. And that stat just reminds me of the horrible days of English cricket. There was no patience at all. No patience.
And on average, per series, Australia used about 13 to 14 players per series. England nearly 20. And in terms of hundreds, Australia made 59 hundreds during those 8 series. England just 24, and obviously one player can get more than 100, so 59 in total. And Australia 44 5-wicket innings, England just 19. So that sort of gives you the gulf indicative, gives you an illustration of the gulf between the two sides. And what I find, it was so one-sided, and for me, the highlights, the best moments for me during that, I'm going to be biased. Seeing David Gow score that 100 at Melbourne in 1991, he came in. They started the day off, and he was on about 33, and Atherton was on 70, and Gower nearly beat Atherton to 100. The first over, he just kept playing these wide square cuts to Terry Alderman, and just in the first over, I think he got about 18 runs and 4 boundaries. It was incredible. So that's one of the highlights for me from a personal point of view. Shane Warne, obviously, Mark Hall's debut, watching Steve Waugh, just watching Steve Waugh get those 200s. And another stat, out of the 45 and 74 players from both sides, so that adds up to 119. Steve Waugh is the only player on either side to have played and featured in all 8 series. So out of those 43 test matches, he played in 40. He missed just 3 test matches, 2 in the Ashes 1991 and 1 in 2001 when he pulled his hamstring. So to play in 40 of those 43 and be present in each series, I think is just testament to him. And let's not forget, he was in the 86-87 series, so he knew what it was like to lose an Ashes series. And I think just going back with Steve Waugh, because I think he's the key figure throughout this period, he's the consistent figure, is he came from a very working class background. He didn't have a lot of money, 4 brothers and his parents. And I read his autobiography about 15 years ago, and he said that because he had to work extra hard to get a lot of things, to achieve a lot of things, he didn't go to private school, he didn't have any hand-me-downs. He grew up in an area called Bankstown in Sydney, which is apparently a very blue-collar and quite dangerous area as well, from what I understand. I've never been, but what I've read about it. And he worked and worked and worked, and he got into the Australian side at 20, and he had this self-drive. And he said he had to wait, I think it was 15 test matches before he tasted victory. And he said he was only brought into the side because Australia had lost so many players to South Africa and the Packer series, the aftermath of that, and then South Africa. He said that's right. And he, and also in his book, he shows that he's done all that charity work again in India, and I think that needs to be mentioned. And he has a very high respect for money. He says money should be respected and looked after, and not live within your means, etc. And that's not saying that he's stingy. I'm not saying that, but he has that respect because of the way he was brought up. And I think we can all learn a lot about that. Some of us from privileged backgrounds. I'm not saying that I'm from any wealthy background, but I went to a good private school, middle class, and sometimes I think people who like that forget that some people don't have all of these things, and it's important that we learn from Steve Waugh, because he's done more than just cricket. He's done his charity work, and in 2019, when Australia were here, sorry, I'm going on about Steve Waugh a little bit, but I think it's worth it. In 2019, when Australia were here, I went up to see Worcestershire play Australia, and I actually managed to get a 10-minute chat with Steve Waugh, who was at the time, I'm not sure if he still is, but he was part of the coaching staff. And I was wearing this Australian shirt, and I had a book about the Waugh twins, about him and his brother. And he spent some time with me, and he said, you clearly have an interest in Australian cricket. And, I pointed to an article I'd written about him and his brother on the Cricketer magazine website.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was really nice. And the funny thing is, I had one of the old cameras, and we know what a great photographer. He's a photographer enthusiast, and he was very happy that I had that. He doesn't know that I've just chucked that away now. But anyway, it was just nice to chat to a guy who I grew up watching from the. I don't remember him making his debut against India in '85, but I certainly remember '86. So I watched his career develop throughout. I saw all 18 years practically.
Yeah.
And let's not forget how he did against the West Indies at double 100. So I think, out of all of the players there, he behaved himself well. I know he has had falling outs with Shane Warne, Michael Slater, but he was the one guy who you could rely on, and and I think Australia should be very proud of him. So I just have some other stats, which I can put as a quiz if you want. I was going to say, I said Steve Waugh played the most Test matches on either side. For England, who do you think played the most Test matches? It's a joint record during that period.
Alison and Stewart.
Yes, 33 each. Yes, very good. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got 5 pairs of relatives who appeared in that Ashes series. If you can name them, they're related.
Relatives, so not siblings.
No, yeah, it could be relatives. Yeah.
Well, obviously the Waugh twins, and then
Waugh twins. Yeah.
Relatives.
5.
Australia.
Yeah,
there's 5 sets of relatives.
2 of them is not blood related, but
I know. Is it Matty Hayden married to? Not Matty Hayden. Hold on. Wait, isn't Nasser Hussain married to? There's someone in England. I'm going to good little quiz this.
Any viewers would want to give? Should I just tell you?
Just get one more.
Sure.
There's definitely a marriage of. It's like, oh God, who's the 2 players there? I know. I can't remember. I can't try to think who it is now. I forgot. It's in England. I'm sure England has a situation where one of the 2 guys, their brother-in-law,
That's right. Yeah.
Which I think from. Okay, is it from the early 90s or late 90s? It's 90s at all.
One is late 90s, the other is early 2000s.
Oh, I know this as well. I know this flipping thing. I thought maybe Alex Stewart, but I don't think it's Alex Stewart.
Yep.
It is Alex Stewart, isn't it?
No, not anymore, but it was. So Alex Stewart's sister married Mark Butcher, but they're no longer married. So, I mean, they were brother-in-laws at one point. And then the other one was, shall I tell you the other one?
Yeah, tell me, yeah.
So Craig White's sister married Darren Lehman.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then the other relatives...
Craig White was Australian. Craig White is Australian. I mean...
Well, yeah, yes.
They both
played for Yorkshire, and that's probably where the chemistry started. And then you've got the Hollyoaks, who both played. And then,
97.
97. And then Ricky Ponting's uncle is Craig Campbell, maternal uncle, Craig Campbell, who played in the 89 Ashes, just one test, but it counts.
I won't call that either.
So there we
go. The Hollyoaks, I should have got the Hollyoaks one in 97, remember that? Yeah. I remember the way that Ben Hollyoak took to Glenn McGraw down the ground, if I remember.
Yeah, and
in that Lord's Test match. Yeah, that was a horrible, yeah. That one.
And along with him, Graham Dilly, Dean Jones, and David Capel passed away from that era. So, rest in peace. An era that obviously painful for us to go back on and see, but we can't take away from the fact that the Australian team just evolved and developed throughout that era. And, their fielding was incredible. Their catching, Mark Waugh in the slips or Mark Taylor, the spin bowling. And it wasn't just Shane Warne. There was Tim May. There was McIntyre. There was, I've forgotten his name, Stuart McGill, who's just been...
kidnapped.
Been kidnapped, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Reggie, I want to get to this question before we finish off, really, about the whole... Obviously, why Australia was so dominant over such a long period of time, that was 15 years. And obviously, England, they were, you go back to obviously 81 Ashes, obviously then 87, obviously they were successful. But then, Australia tasted defeat, obviously, multiple times in the 80s. That being said, they then roared back in the 90s and obviously 2000s as well. And that's continued, obviously, they're pretty much, the way they always seem to give us absolute pasting in Australia. We have to fight a lot more for our victories in England. I know obviously the 3-0 in 2013, that was very skewed in my opinion. Mm-hmm. How that one panned out really was much closer than the result said. Do you think it was simply a case of the structure, first of all, the organisation, so CA versus ECB, in terms of the approach to cricket, obviously before this, a lot of this series we've mentioned before central contracts were announced, which is a big part to play in the improvement in the cricket team. So that's obviously they had the state structure, the 6 states, much more concentrated, high level of domestic cricket that's been played consistently. We had a Division 1, Division 2 of 18 counties. So the structure you could say from not grassroots, but from domestic level, and being able to unearth a high quality of player. Obviously, the training regimes, the coaching, the way the administration is structured, does that have a massive part to play? Or is it simply a case of just stars aligned for Australia to produce an incredible array of talent of this 15-year period, world class? I mean, we've mentioned multiple players. Ricky Ponting hasn't had that big of a mention, and he obviously in '97 did he made that big 100 that you mentioned. In '97 he made the 100. Ricky Ponting.
The 0500 he made. That was before that. Sorry.
97. He played 97. He played 97 series, didn't he?
That was his first Ashes series. Yeah. He did make. I can't recall. He struggled in England at times. Ricky Ponting. His record in England isn't as good as it should be. To be honest,
not so predicting his ability, but the point is Ricky Ponting. There's so many players, and there's people who have not really played for Australia that often. You didn't like a Martin Love, for example. He was a quality player. Tom Moody. Darryl Lee didn't play as much as he thought maybe he could have. And Brad Hodge. There's lots of Berry the keeper. There was a lot. It's shocking how many good players didn't play that much. I mean, Stuart Clark played like what? He tore us apart in 06 or 07. He played at 20 tests.
And he had
Something
to
like
wait
that.
till he was 30 to make his debut.
To make his debut, same with Mike. Look at Mike Hussey, Mr. Cricket, made his debut at 30. But the quality that Australia producing that period was just ridiculous. And it's like, well, it's just simply a case of the stars aligned for Australia, and the stars completely disbanded for England, and we were just a bit of a mess, weren't we? That during the 90s in particular, is it down to mainly that the reason why we were dominated so badly from our perspective, Rajiv, or is it something else at large?
Well, I think a bit of both. You are absolutely right in saying that that era, a lot of people, for whatever reason, born in the late 60s and early 70s, and we just got to mention the people who couldn't get into the side, mainly batsmen, not bowlers, but batsmen. There was a huge glut of them, and we could see the B team, if you want to call it, plying their trade in county cricket and dominating.
Yeah.
And with a cricket team, you can only pick 6 batsmen generally. So a lot of them, just couldn't get in to that side because the talent was so much. And I think, yes, stars align. It was a coincidence that suddenly, every so often you'll get a team that comes together, all born in a particular era or within, a few years of each other, just like with the West Indies with their conveyor belt of fast bowlers. So you had the fast bowlers of the West Indies happening in the 1980s, probably born in the mid-50s in order to be playing in that 80s period. And then with Australia, born in early 70s, late 60s, doing that. So that was one facet. So there is luck. I'm not going to deny that. But then you had this whole system where Australia, I think what they were saying is less is more.
Yes.
And that's why, they only had 6-7 first-class teams.
Yeah.
And if you're going to only have 14 innings in a season, you are going to take care of each of those. If you're playing 17 other counties, that's 34, plus the universities, plus the tour game. You're looking at probably, close to 40 innings. You know that you're going to get another knock soon. And also, I think it's just a general cultural thing, is reading like the books like Graham Gooch, who's the ultimate professional. He said, and Viv Richards, I read both of them, who've obviously played a lot of county cricket. They said that the attitude was there for some of the players was, I'm not going to play for England, but I'm going to hang on to my contract because it gives me a good earning during the summer. There's no really reason for me to develop anymore. I'm not going to play for England. I'm past it, 33, whatever, but I can still get my salary. So that was that. With Australia, if you're not going to be playing for Australia, you're generally pushed out. There's a much more competitive feel to the side. And now I've really heard just most recently that their second 11 state teams can't have more than a certain number of people who are over 23 or something. So it's really pushing. It's very cutthroat. If you can't do it, don't waste our time. And even going down into the recreational thing, me as a 42-year-old can go and play club cricket, which I do for Old Merchant Taylors, and no one stops me. In Australia, there's no real club cricket for people like me who are going there for a social. Of course, I try seriously and try hard, but there's no real scope for us that social, recreational kind of club cricket in Australia. It's, I don't think that culture is there. It's all that pyramid focus to get to that Australian team. And also, because less is more, as I said, the jump between county cricket and test cricket is still a lot, even now, is still a lot bigger than state cricket in Australia to the Australian side. You just have to look at, in the 1990s, you had New South Wales, who had the War Brothers, Michael Bevan, Mark Taylor, Michael Slater, and Glenn McGrath. That could be any test team.
It's still the same now, though, isn't it, with New South Wales? It's pretty much a who's who even now. You got Cummins, you got Stark, you got Nathan Lyon, you got the whole Josh Hazelwood. It is literally the first choice Australia attack plays for New South Wales. You got Stephen Smith and you got David Warner. It's ridiculous. It's the same thing.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I think that the culture, and I think another thing is that since that 2002 series, and we go throughout the 21st century and we look at all the Ashes series since, generally it's home and away victories, but the extent to which Australia are winning away is greater than the extent to which England are winning away. So England are going and losing 4-0, 4-1, whatever in Australia, but Australia coming here, last time it's 2-all, or they're losing 2-1, and it's not as one-sided as when England are going. 5-0, 4-0 last time, 5-0, it's 06, 07, 5-0. It was only 2010, 2011 that it was one-sided the other way when England won.
That was still 3-1.
Yeah, 3-1. So, I mean, it'd be interesting to find out actually when was the last time England won 4 Test matches in an Ashes series. I certainly cannot recall.
No.
Not in my era. I think it was that last one when they went. It was the Packer series, which decimated Australia, and they won 5-1. I think under Mike Brearley.
Yeah, 78-79. I'm just looking now. Yeah, 5-1 and six Test match series.
So that's the last time.
43 years ago. That was when you were born. I mean, that's literally the last time.
So England haven't won 4 Tests in an Ashes series. So even though it's home and away, still I think Australia have got this tendency, the extent to which they win. And I think with Australia, there's a lot more. There seems to be a lot more passion, a lot more purpose in terms of winning it. The Ashes. I get the feeling that they see it as a much more. There's a sense of history, sense of belonging. That baggy green means a lot.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that doesn't mean that England aren't wanting to win. Of course they do. Of course they do. But sometimes I get the feel that with the structure and the attitude, I get the feeling that Australia, it's a much more rigorous, more cutthroat, more driven kind of thing. And I think, and I think that's testament to some of the results that we have seen. But on top of that, I just think, which affects both sides. I think there's too much cricket being played and too much congestion as well. So players aren't getting the time to rest, but that affects both sides. So that evens itself out.
Unfortunately, after all this, even though we're going on memory lane, I don't think we're going to see any real change in fortune in a few months' time as England obviously take another trip to Australia for the most recent Ashes series. I don't really rate our chances very highly, to be honest with you. I think the batting is extremely brittle, and I think it will be found wanting over those 5 tests, I have to say.
Well, I think a couple of things there is I absolutely agree, considering what happened against New Zealand. But around the world, a lot of the batsmen are failing. It's not like in the early 2000s when everyone was scoring heavily. So, and a lot does rely on Joe Root. I don't know how much more he can make being asked to score the runs and coming in at number 4 when they're 13 for 2. Another thing is, I think preparation. I think England should request 3 proper first-class matches before the tour, like they did in 2010.
Like 10 years ago, yeah. I remember, yeah.
And then, the results were shown where the records count. However, I've just seen that they're going to be there for that T20 World Cup, and then the Ashes, and then probably some ODIs mixed in. They're going to be away for 4 months if you're playing all forms of the match. Yeah. I can't see how that can be good preparation. I know because of the global pandemic, things have had to change, but still, it's a big ask. But
a lot of the sides changes there. The T20 World Cup, you're like people who play the Ashes and the T20 World Cup. It's probably Joe Root might sneak in there. Ben Stokes will definitely play. Josh Butler will definitely play. I don't see many other individuals playing in the Test side and the T20 World Cup. I think there'll be a change, quite a heavy change in the 11s. So the players, for example, are Crawley and Burns and Sibley and Pope and obviously Anderson and Broad. Mark Wood, I think, will play the Test series, obviously, and he'll play the T20 World Cup, obviously. Geoff Archer, being well and fit, he'll play as well. But there's going to be a few changes, obviously. So I think for that reason, I think that they should be fairly fresh going into that Test series. But I don't think whatever side they put, it doesn't matter what side they put out, I just don't think they have the caliber of player compared to the likes of Jonathan Trott at 3, Kevin Peterson at 4, Matt Pryor with a well-honed machine at 7. Then you obviously had Cook and Strauss at the top of the order. It was a really, really, I mean, Ian Bell's there as well, experienced. It was a really good, it was a really excellent top 6, top 7, Paul Collingwood there. Collingwood wasn't great, but I mean, he was okay, That's probably the only one weak link. But you look at England's batting now, you just don't see where the runs are going to come from. They'll battle hard, but the reality is England is still going to rely on a 39 and a 35-year-old to get us through. That is the truth. That is the truth.
Whose records in Australia aren't that great either.
Yeah.
So. And the Australian grounds aren't going to offer that lateral movement which Jimmy Anderson so needs. Broad I think will be more successful as he has been in Australia before to a great extent than Jimmy Anderson. But and also the other issue is I think England need to work out who their wicketkeeper is because it keeps changing every 5 minutes. You've got about 5 wicketkeepers in the side, I think we need to sort that out. And I think
Butler's number 1. I mean, James Bracey did absolutely nothing in that Test series versus New Zealand. He showed up massively the golfing class between county cricket and obviously international level. I mean, Ben Foakes is injured. To me, there's no doubt that Josh Butler's number 1. I don't see anyone else. Ben Folks, again, just unfortunately for him, he obviously got the injury, the freak accident. He's out for 3 months. I just don't see it past Josh Butler. I think Josh Butler actually would do quite well with be able to ride the bounce. I think those kind of those strips in Australia actually played to his hands. I personally think Ben Stokes is going to have a fantastic series. I said that on a different show. I feel like we go back up as 4 years now when he threw that ill-fated punch. Outside the nightclub, and obviously we know what happened after that. The court case, etc., was obviously pending. He got dropped from the team. They told the Ashes. He saw his teammates getting battered from pillar to post. Outside that, a wonderful knock from Alistair Cook at Melbourne. They got battered, as we know. So it's still lost 4-0, obviously, as we know that. So Ben Stokes watched on, thought I could be helping the guys now, but he got pissed. He did what he did, and he missed out. I think this is literally the peak of his powers, 30 years old. I think he's going to be like a man possessed. We know what he can do in Australia. We saw it in 13-14 as a 122-year-old. The 125 at Perth in face of Mitch Johnson and the rest of these guys, where everyone around him is getting splattered. As a 22-year-old to score 125 was absolutely incredible. Yeah. So he's really got a fire in his belly, and I think he's going to have an almighty series, Ben Stokes. But I just think it's going to be like Flint off in 06-07. He's going to get literally probably driven into the ground by Joe Root.
On those hard pitches, I do.
I think he will. I think he performed very well. I think with bat and ball, he'll do well.
Yeah. I look forward to it. Staying up at night and trying to watch that Ashes series.
That'll be interesting. But anything else you want to finalise with? Richie,
great series, and I think we should thank the Australian players for providing that entertaining era. That all the praise belongs to them. They raised the bar, they entertained, and they changed cricket. And they did it sometimes in a questionable way, never cheating, of course. That would come later. And in fact, I interacted with them in 2005 after the Lord's Test. So they were still happy after the Lord's Test. It was just before their tour was going to go south. And it was when I was working at Deloitte, and we had a work function with them. And unfortunately, it rained the whole day. But it was going to be a six-a-side tournament. And I had Kasparovich in my side. And Shane Warne was in the same group, so I would have potentially faced him. But it rained the whole day. It was at Richmond Cricket Club, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
And I interacted, and they're a really great bunch of guys. A long chat with Kasparovich and Jason Gillespie. Really nice to meet them. And the wars had gone by then. The sort of my era, Mark Taylor, Ian Healy, Alan Border, they'd gone by then. But it was still nice to see the guys play. Ricky Ponting was there, Shane Warne, and Gilchrist, a very nice gentleman. And so that was probably the closest I've ever got to the Australian players. But I remember it well. So I think just a thank you on that. And I don't think we'll get a team like that for we talk about the West Indies 1980s, the Australian team of 48. But again, we say Australia 48. So I don't think a team just because it's one season counts. But yet we still talk about the 48. It's not like the 40s or the 50s. So I don't know why I think they won everything on that. Great, but it was just one season. So the West Indies 80s, Australia 90s, 2000s, early 2000s. So I don't think we're going to get this till, probably in another 40, 50 years. But I won't stop reminding people, the next generation who are growing up now, the youngsters, that I saw Australian cricket at its most exhilarating best.
Yeah. Excellent way to finish the show. Rajiv, thank you for that. Yeah, so guys, obviously Rajiv Ronnie Christian, once again, as you know, avid English cricket fan, occasional writer as well, who actually wrote a book as well. We only mentioned it briefly last time, but Rajiv has wrote a book on cricket. What's the title of it, Rajiv?
It's but my life in cricket, 1986, when I first remembered it, to just before the World Cup in 2019. And it got referenced in Wisden Almanac.
Excellent. There we go, guys. So thank you, Rajiv, once again for coming to the show. I'm sure we've got lots more to talk about in the future. I'm sure we'll do many more shows ahead. And generally trips down memory lane, which is quite nice for me actually. Then continually talk about current affairs. It's nice to go back in time, even if it's painful as it has been to dig up some of these memories. But it was a great era in cricket. So yeah, anyway, I'll leave it there, guys. If you enjoy the content, as I always say, please like, comment, subscribe, and hopefully I will see you on the next show. All right, cheers, guys. Thank you.
Cheers, Shay. Thank you.